I sat at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold 10 minutes ago. Across from me, Alan wouldn't look up from the grain in the wood, like eye contact might make this harder to say, or easier to deny later. "Margaret," he began, and already I could hear it in his voice, the careful tone people used when they wanted something from you but didn't want to admit they were taking it. "Waited. I think it might be best if you don't come up to the cottage this Christmas." For a second the words didn't land. They hovered over the table like steam that refused to disappear. Then they hit. I blinked once. My throat tightened, not in a dramatic way. More like my body was trying to keep me from saying something that would prove their point. "Don't come," I repeated quietly. "To our family Christmas." Alan finally lifted his eyes. His expression was soft in the way people get when they've already decided you're going to be hurt, but they want credit for feeling bad about it. "The kids think it would be calmer," he said. "Just this year." I set the mug down. The ceramic clicked against the table, louder than it should have been in a house that was suddenly too quiet. "Calmer," I echoed. "That's the word we're using now." Alan sighed. Not an angry sigh. A weary one. The kind that implied I was a problem he'd been managing for a while. "You've been difficult lately," he said. There it was. Difficult. Not wrong. Not unfair. Not even mean. Just difficult. As if I were a malfunctioning appliance. I leaned back in my chair and studied him the way I used to study bills before I paid them. Calm, careful, hunting for the part that didn't add up. "Difficult how?" "Yes." Alan pressed his lips together. He glanced toward the hallway, as if Trevor and Emma might be hiding around the corner, feeding him lines. "You know," he said, "the way you've been with them." "With them," I repeated. "Okay. Let's be specific." Alan shifted. "At Thanksgiving, you wouldn't stop questioning Trevor about his plans." My mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "His plans," I said. "You mean quitting his job to trade full-time, after watching videos on his phone for 2 weeks?" "It's not just that," Alan said quickly. "It's your tone." "My tone," I said, tasting the absurdity. I asked him where the money was coming from and if he'd done a budget. "And Emma," Alan added, like he'd been waiting to unload this part. "At her birthday dinner you embarrassed her." My eyes narrowed. "By asking why her boyfriend speaks to waitstaff like they're furniture." Alan looked away again. "You don't have to challenge everything." My fingers tightened around the edge of my chair. Challenge. That was what they called it when I asked for respect. When I insisted on basics. When I refused to smile through things that would have made my mother shake her head in shame. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "Trevor wants me to clap while he sets fire to his savings. And Emma wants me to pretend I don't hear a grown man snapping his fingers at a server. And because I didn't play along, I'm difficult." Alan's shoulders sagged. "It's not about right or wrong. It's about peace." I almost laughed. Almost. Because peace in this family didn't mean calm. Meant silence. It meant me swallowing my words until they turned into headaches and tight shoulders, and those late nights I spent staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations where I'd been talked over like I was background noise. "When did this become a vote?" "Yes." Alan hesitated. "Trevor mentioned it first." Emma agreed. They feel like they're walking on eggshells." I stared at him, and something inside me cooled over, smooth and hard, like the surface of Lake Simcoe in January. Eggshells. I'd spent decades cleaning up everyone else's messes, literal and emotional. I'd organized birthdays, managed school forms, remembered allergies, booked dentist appointments, negotiated family tensions with a smile so practiced it had become invisible. And now they were walking on eggshells around me. "How convenient," I said, voice quiet. Alan leaned forward slightly, as if he were about to be reasonable. "It's just one Christmas, Marg. Give everyone space. We'll go up on the 23rd, come back after Boxing Day. You can have the house to yourself. Rest. Reset." I didn't miss the way he said "we" like it was already decided. Like I was already excluded. "And where am I supposed to go?" "Yes." Alan spread his hands. You don't have to go anywhere. Stay here. Or, you could visit your sister in Mississauga. My sister. The one who called only when she needed something. But I glanced past Alan toward the living room where the Christmas decorations were still in their boxes. Labels in my handwriting. Lights. Ornaments, fragile. Nativity. I packed them up every year. I'd unpacked them every year. Not once had anyone asked if I still enjoyed doing it. I looked back at Alan. Do Trevor and Emma know you're saying this to me right now? Yes. Alan's jaw worked. They didn't want to hurt you. I nodded slowly, as if accepting a fact. So you volunteered, I said. Alan flinched. That's not fair. I stood. My knees cracked. I hated that they did that now. Another reminder that time kept moving whether anyone noticed me or not. I picked up my mug and walked to the sink, letting the water run a little too long. Behind me, Alan said softer. Margaret, please don't make this into a bigger thing. I stared at the water swirling into the drain. A bigger thing. I turned off the tap, set the mug down and faced him. I'm not making it bigger, I said. I'm finally seeing it for what it is. Alan frowned. What does that mean? I opened my mouth then closed it. Because the truth was, there were a dozen things I could say. But the one that mattered most wasn't something Alan would understand yet. Not until later. Not until the part of my life they'd all ignored, because it didn't serve them, became impossible to pretend didn't exist. I reached for a dish towel, dried my hands slowly and said, It means you should go pack. Alan blinked. Pack? For the cottage, I said evenly. Since you've already decided. He hesitated. Mark. I lifted a hand, stopping him. Not because I didn't have feelings. Because I had too many. And I refused to spill them in front of someone who would later use them as proof that I was the problem. Alan stared at me, uncertain, then finally stood and walked out of the kitchen. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway, then to the creak of the closet door in our bedroom. I stood alone in the kitchen of the house I had held together for years. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't rush to fix what was breaking. I walked to the small desk near the window, the one Alan called my little paperwork corner, and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside was a folder, thick with documents I'd been organizing quietly for months. Legal papers, letters, property forms. The top page had a Toronto address printed in crisp black ink. Duplex. My mother's duplex. My inheritance. I ran my thumb along the edge of the folder and whispered, so softly even I almost didn't hear it. Calmer. Then I closed the drawer with a gentle click and went upstairs, already planning how I would spend Christmas. Alone, yes. But not helpless. Not this time. If you've ever been called difficult for simply having standards, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to Revenge Bite. Because my story is just getting started. And I have a feeling you need to hear how it ends. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay on my side listening to Alan breathe. Steady, unbothered, while my mind replayed the conversation like it was a voicemail I couldn't delete. Calmer eggshells, difficult. By morning the house felt staged. It was like every object had been placed to convince a stranger that a normal marriage lived here. Alan left early to run errands for the trip, which meant he wanted distance, and I let him take it. I moved through the kitchen on autopilot, wiping down counters that were already clean, loading a dishwasher that didn't need loading. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Trevor. Trevor, hey Mom. Dad said you guys talked. Can we not do drama right before Christmas? I stared at the screen, stunned by how casually he asked me not to bleed. Type. Deleted. Typed again. Margaret, I'm not doing drama. I'm responding to being uninvited. 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Trevor. It's just, you've been on edge lately. Everything turns into a lecture. Lecture. That was the word they used for any sentence that didn't end with, sure, honey, whatever you want. I didn't answer. I set the phone down and walked to the window. Snow fell in thin, lazy strands, dusting the driveway. It looked peaceful outside. Inside, my chest felt crowded. Another buzz. Emma this time. Emma, Mom, please don't be mad. I just want everyone to have a nice Christmas. I read it twice. I could almost hear Emma's voice, soft and careful, the voice she used when she tried to soothe conflict without ever naming who caused it. I picked up the phone and called her. Emma answered on the second ring. Hi. Did you agree with this? I asked, skipping every polite bridge. Mom. Emma. Emma exhaled. I didn't plan it. Trevor brought it up and Dad thought it made sense and You just didn't stop it, I finished. That's not fair, Emma said quickly. You've been intense. I felt my jaw tighten. Intense because I asked Trevor to show me a budget. Emma's voice rose slightly. Because you say things like he's an idiot. I didn't say he was an idiot, I said. I said the plan was reckless. It's the same thing, Emma snapped, then immediately softened. I'm sorry. I'm tired, Mom. I'm tired of tension. Closed my eyes. There it was again. Tension like it floated into the room on its own, not like it was created by disrespect and then blamed on whoever refused to pretend it didn't exist. Do you know what I'm tired of? I asked quietly. Emma didn't answer. I'm tired of doing the thinking and being punished for it, I said. I'm tired of being the person who notices what's wrong and then being called difficult for noticing. Emma whispered. I don't want you to feel like that. And yet, I said, here we are. A few seconds of silence stretched between us. Emma finally said, Dad thinks you should take the time to rest. Maybe reflect. Maybe next year. I laughed once, short and sharp. Next year. Like I'm a noisy appliance you'll put back in the living room when everyone's ready. Mom, stop. I'm going to hang up now, I said. Because if I keep talking, you'll tell people I blew up. Mom. I ended the call. The quiet after was heavy but clean. No sighs. No interruptions. No looks exchanged over my head. I went to the hall closet where the Christmas boxes waited. The labels in my handwriting stared back at me like proof I had existed in this family long before they voted me out. I pulled out the lights, held the tangled cords in my hands, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't start untangling. I set them back down. Instead, I walked to my little desk by the window and opened my laptop. Not the family laptop. My own. The one I'd bought with money Alan didn't notice because he never tracked what I contributed. Only what I cost. An email from my lawyer sat at the top of the inbox, flagged. Closing schedule, December 26th, 12:01 a.m. My heart gave a slow, deliberate thud. I clicked it and read the first line. Everything is in order. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling, letting a strange calm settle over me like a blanket. So this was what it felt like. To have something real in my hands. Not an argument. Not a feeling. Not a role. Something that could not be dismissed as a tone. Footsteps sounded upstairs. Alan opening drawers, packing sweaters, moving through our room like a man preparing for a trip he hadn't earned. I closed the laptop gently. If they wanted calm, they were about to get it. Just not the kind that made their lives easier. The kind that made mine clear. The duplex had been my mother's pride and my family's punchline. When she was alive, she called it the safety net. She'd stand on the sidewalk in front of that tired brick building on a quiet Toronto street and say, like she was telling me a secret, "This keeps you free, Maggie. This keeps you from begging." Alan never laughed in her face. He waited until we were alone and then let out that small dismissive breath. "It's an old duplex," he'd said once. "It's not some empire." I didn't argue. I'd learned that the quickest way to be labeled difficult was to insist on being right. When my mother died, the duplex didn't just come with grief. Came with envelopes, forms, phone calls. A tenant who suddenly stopped paying rent and acted like I should be grateful he answered me at all. The first time I mentioned the duplex at dinner, Trevor smirked like I'd told him I was taking up tap dancing. "So you're a landlord now," he joked, stabbing his fork into chicken. "Mom's about to start posting inspirational quotes about passive income." Emma laughed too, then caught my face and softened. "I'm kidding, Mom. Good. It's nice. Like a hobby. Alan waved a hand as if he were brushing lint off his sleeve. We'll deal with it when things settle down. For now, don't stress yourself. That phrase, don't stress yourself, was the family's way of saying, stop talking. So I stopped. Loud. In private, I did what I'd always done when something mattered. I handled it. I met with an estate lawyer downtown. I sat in a waiting room full of people who looked like they belonged in boardrooms, not in kitchens still smelling faintly of funeral food. The lawyer was a woman in her 40s with sharp glasses and a voice that didn't waste time. She flipped through the will, tapped a paragraph with her pen and said, "You're the sole beneficiary." And blinked. "Sole?" "Yes," she said. "The property is left directly to you." My stomach tightened. Not from guilt because my mother had been clear about what she wanted, but from the knowledge of what my family would assume. They'd assume family money meant their money. The lawyer continued, calm and methodical. "Probate will take time. There are some outstanding items. Tenant paperwork, a small lien that can be cleared. But nothing unmanageable. Nothing unmanageable. Course it was manageable. I had managed a household, 3 children, and a marriage for decades. Paperwork didn't scare me. People did. Over the next months I did it piece by piece. I got the death certificates. I filed what needed filing. I made lists. I kept copies of everything. I hired help where I needed it. Not because I couldn't do it, but because I wanted it clean. Documented. Unarguable. The tenant situation was the worst of it. He'd been polite to my mother. With me he became slippery. Late payments. Excuses. A sudden confidence that the quiet middle-aged woman on the phone couldn't possibly know her rights. He was wrong. It took 3 phone calls, 1 registered letter, and a conversation with a paralegal before his tone changed from careless to cautious. And each time I put the phone down afterward, my hands would shake. Not because I was afraid, but because the truth kept repeating itself in my head. They don't take you seriously until you force them to. One afternoon, my realtor walked through the duplex with a measuring tape and a thoughtful frown. "This is a good lot," he said. I folded my arms. "It's a duplex." He smiled slightly. "It's land." I didn't speak. Waited. He kept going. "If you list it as a rental property, investors will be interested. If you talk to developers." "Developers?" I repeated, and the word felt like something sharp in my mouth. He nodded. "This neighborhood is shifting. A developer will pay for location, not paint." My hands went cold. I imagined telling Alan and watching him suddenly become an expert. I imagined Trevor asking for a small loan because he was thinking bigger now. I imagined Emma crying about fairness and family and how I shouldn't make money a wedge. I swallowed. "How much?" he asked. He named a range and my knees almost gave out. I sat down on the dusty staircase because my body forgot for a second how to hold itself up. That moment, when I realized I wasn't just holding on to an old duplex but proof that I'd been right all along, that's when everything shifted. If you're here for the moment the world finally sees what they refuse to, subscribe to Revenge Bite. You'll want to see what happens next. It ran into millions. Not fantasy millions. Real Toronto numbers that came with contracts and conditions and signatures. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just stared at the floor and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not greed. Relief. Relief that my mother had been right. Relief that there was still a part of my life that belonged to me. That night, at home, Alan complained about traffic and Trevor sent memes in the group chat and Emma asked for a recipe. I answered politely. I smiled at the right moments. And when no one was looking, I opened my folder, checked the timeline again, and marked the date on my calendar with a pen that didn't shake. December 26th. 12:01 a.m. If they wanted me quiet for Christmas, fine. Let them have their calm. Because when the clock turned, the truth would be louder than anything I'd ever said at that kitchen table. Alan packed like a man going on vacation. I watched him move through our bedroom folding sweaters, checking lists, zipping bags with a strange, relieved efficiency. As if the cottage wasn't a family tradition, but an escape hatch. He didn't ask if I needed anything. He didn't ask if I'd changed my mind. He asked, "Do we have extra batteries for the fireplace remote?" I stood in the doorway and said, "Top drawer in the kitchen, next to the tape." He nodded like I'd done my job correctly and went back to packing. Even uninvited, I was still the map. After he left to run errands, I walked downstairs and sat at my desk. Outside, the winter light made Toronto look washed out and private. Inside, my laptop screen glowed like a small secret. I opened my email chain with the lawyer first, then the thread with my realtor, then the spreadsheet I'd made, because of course I'd made one. Required documents, received documents, follow-up, confirmation numbers. A paper trail so clean nobody could twist it into a family argument later. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. People who didn't listen to you would listen to receipts. My phone buzzed. Trevor, Mom, Dad said you're staying home. That's probably for the best. We can all cool off. Cool off. As if I were a boiling pot they needed to remove from the stove so dinner wouldn't be ruined. I didn't reply. I clicked the newest attachment from the lawyer. The closing checklist. Transfer of title confirmed. Buyer funds scheduled. Final signatures received. Statement of adjustments prepared. It was strange how comforting legal language could be. It didn't care if I was difficult. It didn't care if my tone was wrong. It only cared if things were true. My phone buzzed again. Emma, Mom, are you okay? Please don't make Dad's life hard right now. He's stressed too. I stared at that sentence until my eyes went dry. Don't make Dad's life hard. Even now, my feelings were an inconvenience, and his discomfort was an emergency. Typed one line. Margaret, I'm not making anything hard. I'm making decisions. I didn't get a reply. But I opened my notes app and wrote a list for myself. Simple because simple was harder to twist. Don't beg. Don't explain. Don't perform sadness so they can feel justified. Don't let them turn this into a family meeting about everyone's feelings. 'Cause that was their favorite move. They'd drown me in group emotions until my one clear point disappeared. Later, I stood in the kitchen staring at the roll of wrapping paper I'd bought weeks ago. Red with tiny white snowflakes. I put it on the counter next to scissors and tape, automatically, like my hands were following a script I'd written years ago. Then I stopped. I could already picture it. Alan bringing the gifts to the cottage, explaining I couldn't make it. Everyone nodding sympathetically while eating dinner, and my absence being presented like an unfortunate scheduling conflict. I picked up the wrapping paper and put it back in the pantry. Not because I didn't love my kids. Because I refused to participate in my own erasure. When Alan came home, his cheeks were pink from the cold, hands full of grocery bags. Got everything, he said, like he was proud of completing a task. I moved aside so he could pass. He hesitated in the hallway. You sure you don't want to come, Marg? The audacity of it, like I'd chosen exile. You already asked me not to, I said. His mouth tightened. It's not like that. It is exactly like that, I replied softly. You just don't like hearing it said out loud. Alan opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't used to me speaking like this. Clear, simple, without apology. We're leaving tomorrow morning, he said finally. He nodded. Drive safe. He waited like he expected me to crack. Like he expected tears he could later label as proof. There were none. When he went upstairs, I returned to my desk and stared at my calendar. December 26th, 12:01 a.m. The time was so precise it almost felt petty. But it wasn't petty. It was clean. It was final. I clicked confirm on the last document, watched the screen flash. Signed. Receive. Complete. And for the first time in a long time I felt something shift. Not in them. Me. I whispered into the quiet house. You wanted calm. And I meant it. Because calm was coming. Just not the kind that made their lives easier. The kind that made mine. On the morning of the 23rd, I heard the car before I saw it. The engine started. Trunk slammed. Alan's boots thudded down the porch steps. I stood at the living room window, arms wrapped around myself, and watched him load the last bag like he was fleeing a fire. He didn't come back inside for a final goodbye. Instead, he texted me from the driveway. "Alan, we're on the road. Call if you need anything. Love you." I read it, then set the phone down without answering. Outside, the car pulled away, tires crunching on frozen gravel. And then silence. The house didn't feel peaceful. Felt abandoned. I walked from room to room like I was checking an Airbnb before guests arrived. Straightening pillows nobody would use. Turning off lights nobody would see. Closing curtains as if the neighbors might watch my loneliness through the glass. I stopped in front of the Christmas boxes again. The labels in my handwriting looked too neat, too certain. For a moment, I almost opened them out of habit. Then I remembered Trevor's message. "Cool off." I remembered Emma's. "Don't make Dad's life hard." I remembered Alan's sigh. The same one he'd used for years when I tried to talk about anything that didn't make his life smoother. I turned away from the boxes and went to the kitchen. I made myself lunch like it mattered. Not because I was hungry. Because I refused to become a ghost in my own home. A sandwich, a bowl of soup, a glass of water. Simple. Normal. I ate at the kitchen table where I'd been voted off the island, staring at the empty chair across from me. Afterward, I washed the dishes slowly, letting the warm water run over my hands. The routine steadied me. My phone stayed face down on the counter. By evening, messages had stacked up anyway. A photo from Trevor. The cottage driveway covered in snow, captioned, "Made it." A voice note from Emma. "Hi Mom, just checking in. Hope you're okay." A short text from Alan. "Kids are here. They asked about you. They asked about me." Like I was a missing decoration. I sat on the couch with a throw blanket pulled up to my chest. The TV played softly, but I wasn't watching. My eyes kept drifting to the clock above the fireplace. Time moved differently when no one needed anything from me. Around 9 p.m. I went upstairs. In the bedroom, Alan's side of the closet looked emptier than it should have. His absence had weight. I opened the dresser drawer and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a key. An old brass key with a worn head, my mother's key. I hadn't used it in months. Not since the locksmith changed the duplex locks and handed me a new set. I'd kept the old one anyway, like a relic. I held it in my palm and felt my chest tighten. Grief rose fast, sharp. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. "This keeps you free, Maggie. This keeps you from begging." I sat on the edge of the bed and let a single tear fall. Not the kind of crying that asks someone to come save you, but the kind that comes when you finally admit you've been saving everyone else for too long. I wiped my face quickly, annoyed with myself, then laughed under my breath. Even alone, I still felt the instinct to hide it. I went downstairs again and turned on the lamp by my desk. I opened my laptop, not to work, but to read the closing timeline one more time, like touching the edge of something solid. Funds scheduled, December 26th, 12:01 a.m. I stared at it until my eyes burned. Then I closed the laptop and walked into the dark living room. I sat with the quiet, not scrolling, not distracting myself, just sitting in the truth of it. They had chosen a Christmas without me. Fine. Let them have it. Because the part of me they dismissed, the part they'd called difficult, was the same part that had been doing the work quietly in the background while they lived comfortably in a world I held up. At 11:58 p.m., I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the couch. At 11:59 I set my phone on the coffee table, screen up this time. At midnight, the house felt like it held its breath. I watched the digits change. 12 o'clock, 12:01, and then, my phone lit up. Not a message, not a call, a notification. Deposit alert. I didn't move for a full second. My body went still, like it didn't trust good news anymore. Then my eyes focused, and the numbers swam into clarity. A number so large it didn't feel like money. Felt like proof. My throat tightened as I whispered, "So it's done." The phone buzzed again immediately. Incoming call. Trevor. I stared at his name lighting up the screen, and for the first time in days, I smiled, small, tired, and dangerously calm. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. "Hello," said voice steady. Trevor didn't say Merry Christmas. He didn't say hi. He said, breathless and shaking with something between anger and panic, "Mom, what the hell did you do?" I kept my voice even, the way I did when I spoke to customer service agents who tried to rush me off the phone. "Trevor," I said. "It's late." He swallowed hard, breath crackling through the line. "Mom, why is there an article with your name in it? Why is my phone blowing up? What did you do?" I glanced at the tea cooling on the coffee table. The steam had stopped rising, but my hands were steady. "What did you see?" "Yes." Trevor's voice pitched higher, like a man trying not to sound scared and failing. Someone sent me a screenshot. A developer North something. And your name. And Grandma's duplex address." He exhaled sharply. "It says you sold it." I didn't correct him. "Not yet." "You're reading other people's screenshots at midnight," I said. "But you couldn't call me when Dad told you I wasn't welcome at Christmas." "Mom, don't." Trevor's voice cracked. "This isn't about that." I leaned back into the couch. "It's exactly about that." Silence hit the line, thick and embarrassed. Trevor tried again. "How much?" I let the question hang for a beat, long enough to make him feel what I'd felt at the kitchen table, waiting for someone to decide if I mattered. $2.7 million, I said finally. "Sale price." Trevor made a noise. Half gasp, half laugh of disbelief. "No. No way." I stared at my reflection in the dark window. "After fees and legal," I continued calmly, "it's a little over $2 million in my account." Trevor went quiet. Then, "Why didn't you tell us?" I pressed my lips together. There were 100 answers. The grief. Paperwork. The nights I sat at my desk while Alan watched TV and called it, "your little admin stuff." The way Trevor laughed when I mentioned the duplex. The way Emma called it nice. But I chose the simplest one because simple was harder to twist. "You didn't ask," I said. Trevor's breathing changed. "That's not fair." "It is fair," I replied. "It's just uncomfortable." I heard movement on his end like he was pacing. "Mom, Dad is going to freak out." My eyes narrowed slightly. Dad already decided I wasn't coming. "Mom, don't," I cut in softly. "Don't suddenly recruit me into everyone else's emotional emergency." Another vibration hit my phone. "Call waiting." "Emma." I didn't switch over. Trevor said, "Emma's crying. She thinks you're mad at her." My chest tightened but my tone stayed level. "Emma didn't stop it." Trevor's voice dropped. Are you going to do something? Like leave Dad? Cut us off? What is happening?" I almost smiled at the irony. Now he wanted clarity. Now he wanted a plan. Now he wanted me to explain myself so he could brace for impact. I looked at the folder on my desk across the room, the documents that had become my quiet spine. "I'm going to sleep," I said. Trevor froze. "What?" "I'm going to sleep," I repeated. "I've done enough tonight." "Mom, you can't just." "Yes, I can," I said gently. "Because for once, I'm not managing your feelings." I heard him swallow. "Please. Just tell me if you're okay." Pause. That question, "Are you okay?" was always asked too late, like an apology for not seeing me earlier. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm just awake." I ended the call. Immediately the phone rang again. Emma. I stared at the screen. My daughter's name pulsed like a bruise. Answered. "Hi," Emma whispered, voice thick. "Mom." Waited. Emma inhaled shakily. "Is it true?" "Yes," I said. A sob escaped her, small and contained. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? I would have supported you." Closed my eyes. Would she have? Or would she have said, "Don't stress yourself. Let Dad handle it. Don't make this a wedge"? I didn't say any of that out loud. Instead I asked, Emma, when Dad told you I shouldn't come, what did you say? Emma's silence was answer enough. My voice softened. You can cry. But don't rewrite history. Mom, I'm sorry, Emma pleaded. I didn't realize. You didn't realize because you didn't look, I replied. Emma's breathing stuttered. Dad is coming home. My stomach sank just slightly, but I kept my voice steady. Of course he is, I said. The kids don't want drama, remember? The line went quiet. Emma whispered, Please don't hate us. I looked down at my hands, then at the phone. I don't hate you, I said. But I'm not chasing you anymore. I ended the call. The house fell silent again. I stood, turned off the lamp, and went upstairs. For the first time in days, I slept. The next afternoon, I heard the car before I saw it. Not Alan's careful, familiar approach. Just impatient. Tires crunching too hard in the driveway. A door slammed. Footsteps on the porch. Then the key in the lock, turning like Alan still believed this house belonged to him more than it belonged to me. He came in with cold air clinging to his jacket and his eyes already shining with accusation. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, calm as a closed door. Alan froze when he saw me. For a second his face softened, almost relief. Then it tightened again. Margaret, he said, voice sharp. Why didn't you tell me? I tilted my head slightly. Tell you what? Alan's jaw flexed. Don't do that. I didn't blink. Don't do what? Alan stepped forward as if the room itself was against him. The duplex. Still. The money. The fact that my son calls me at midnight like I'm the last person to know what's happening in my own family. I folded my arms. In my own family, I repeated. Interesting phrase. Alan threw his hands up. What is wrong with you? My laugh was quiet. You tell me. I'm the difficult one. Alan stared at me, and for the first time since the kitchen table conversation, he looked unsure. Not angry strong, just unsettled. Margaret, he tried again, lowering his voice. We're married. Yes, I said. We are. So why would you do this without telling me? Alan demanded. I held his gaze. Because I didn't want negotiations, I said. I didn't want opinions. I didn't want a committee meeting where everyone decides what I'm allowed to do with something my mother left to me. Alan's mouth opened, then closed. I continued, each word even deliberate. You didn't want me at Christmas because I make things tense. But you had no problem enjoying the calm I created for decades. You just didn't want the part of me that speaks. Alan's eyes flashed. This isn't about speaking. This is about trust. I nodded slowly. Then answer this. When was the last time you asked me what I wanted? Alan hesitated. I didn't wait. When was the last time you asked me what I was doing at my desk late at night? Pressed. When was the last time you asked me if I was lonely in this marriage? Alan's throat bobbed. You didn't, I said softly. So don't lecture me about trust. A knock sounded at the door before Alan could respond. Not a gentle one. 2 knocks, quick and anxious. Alan's eyes flicked toward it like he already knew. I walked past him and opened the door. Trevor and Emma stood on the porch side by side, red-eyed and stiff, like teenagers waiting to be punished. Mom, Emma whispered. Trevor tried to smile and failed. Hey! I stepped back. Come in. They entered slowly, glancing around the living room like the furniture might testify. Nobody sat down at first. Trevor cleared his throat. We owe you an apology. Emma nodded quickly. Multiple. Waited. Trevor's shoulders rose and fell. We've been treating you like you're too much. Like you're always the problem. Emma's voice broke. We made you feel invisible. I felt something move in my chest, sharp and hot, but I didn't let it spill out as tears. Instead, I asked the question that mattered. Are you here because you respect me, I said, or because you just found out I'm worth millions? Trevor flinched. Emma's face crumpled. Alan said, Margaret. I lifted a hand, stopping him without looking. Trevor swallowed. Both, he admitted. At first it was. He shook his head like he hated himself. At first it was panic, then guilt, then shame. Because it shouldn't have taken money for us to see what we did. I stared at my son, the man he'd become, and felt a strange, quiet grief for the boy who used to run to me when he was hurt. I appreciate the honesty, I said. Emma stepped forward, voice trembling. Mom, can we fix this? I nodded once. Maybe. Emma exhaled shakily, like she'd been holding her breath for days. I continued. But here's what's not happening. Trevor stiffened. I looked at them one by one. I'm not giving anyone access to my inheritance as a substitute for respect, I said. No loans. No investment opportunities. No help us just this once. Trevor's cheeks reddened. Mom, I wasn't. I cut him off gently. You don't even realize how quickly you thought it. Silence. Kept going. If you want me in your life, you will treat me like a human being. Before money, after money, regardless of money. Emma nodded quickly. Yes. I turned to Alan. And you, I said. If we're going to stay married, we're going to therapy. Not because I need fixing, but because I'm done being managed. Alan's face tightened. So you're punishing us? My smile was small and sad. No, I said. I'm choosing myself. Trevor's eyes filled again. Mom. I held up my hand. I'm not finished. They fell quiet. Next Christmas, I said. I don't want an invitation. I want a family that doesn't need to decide whether my presence is convenient. Trevor nodded. Emma nodded. Even Alan went still. I stepped back, gesturing toward the couch. Now, I said, sit down. And tell me the truth, without blaming me for how you feel. For the first time in a long time, the room didn't rearrange itself around Alan's comfort. It arranged itself around my boundaries. And nobody, not even Trevor, knew what to say to that. The first change didn't happen with a grand apology. It happened 2 days later, when Trevor texted. Trevor, can we talk when you're ready? Not about money. About everything else. I read it once, then twice. Not about money. I didn't reply immediately. Old Margaret would have rushed to soothe him, to make his discomfort lighter. This Margaret sat with the message, felt the urge to fix, and let it pass like a wave. When I finally answered, it was one line. Margaret, Saturday. Noon. Coffee shop on Yonge. 1 hour. Trevor showed up early. He stood when I walked in, like he didn't know what else to do with his hands anymore. Hi, Mom, he said softly. I took my time removing my coat, folding it neatly over the chair, choosing calm like it was a language I'd learned fluently. Hi, I said. Start with the truth. Trevor swallowed. Last Christmas. I was relieved you weren't coming. I didn't flinch. I sipped my coffee. He kept going, voice strained. I thought it would be easier. Less tension. Less, you calling things out. Kept my eyes on him. And it was awful, he admitted. Not because you weren't there to cook or organize. 'Cause it felt wrong. Like we'd taken you out of the picture and expected the family photo to still look normal. I watched him struggle through the sentence, and something inside me loosened. Not forgiveness, not yet. Just recognition. Trevor wiped his palms against his jeans. I keep thinking about how many times you tried to warn me about stuff and I treated it like nagging. And now I'm seeing that you were paying attention. I set down my cup. Paying attention is not a personality flaw, I said. It's what kept you alive as a child. Trevor nodded quickly, eyes shining. He didn't ask for money. Not once. That mattered more than any apology. A week later, Emma came over alone. She didn't bring a speech. She brought a notebook. I wrote things down, Emma said, holding it like an offering. Because I didn't want to forget them or twist them. I raised an eyebrow. Such as. Emma opened the notebook, voice quiet. Hitches. I used peace as an excuse to avoid conflict, and I let you pay the emotional cost for it. I cared more about my boyfriend thinking I had a chill family than about you being respected. My throat tightened. Emma looked up. I'm sorry. I nodded slowly. What are you going to do differently? Emma didn't hesitate. When Trevor talks about you like you're dramatic, I stop him. When Dad sighs and tries to shut you down, I say something. Even if it's uncomfortable. Even if people get mad at me. I studied my daughter for a long moment. Then I said, good. Because I had learned something important. Intentions were sweet, but boundaries were real. Alan held out the longest. He went to therapy with me because I demanded it, but he walked in like a man arriving at a courtroom. Dr. Kapoor's office was warm and neutral, the kind of place that made people feel safe enough to say ugly truths. In the third session, Alan finally asked, "So what do you want now?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about the duplex, paperwork, the nights at my desk, the way the family's love had felt conditional on my silence. I want to stop shrinking, I said. Alan's face tightened. I never asked you to shrink. I looked at him. You asked me every time you called me difficult. That landed. Not like a slap, like a weight. Alan stared at his hands, and for the first time he didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just sat there, breathing like he'd run out of excuses. The money stayed separate. I made that decision quietly and permanently, and I didn't apologize for it. I used a portion to buy myself something practical and symbolic, a small condo closer to downtown, not as an escape but as proof. Proof that if love required me to be trapped, it wasn't love. I didn't move out immediately, but I owned a door that only I had the key to. By the time next December arrived, the family didn't ask if I was coming to the cottage. They asked what dates worked for me. They asked what I wanted to cook together. They asked if I preferred to drive separately. Small questions. Respectful questions. The kind that said, "We see you as a person with choices, not a role with obligations." On Christmas Eve at the cottage, I stood at the sink rinsing dishes while the others talked behind me. Laughter rose, familiar and imperfect. Trevor came up beside me and said quietly, "I need you to know something." I didn't turn. "Go on." He swallowed. "The money made me pay attention. But it's not why I'm here now. I'm here because you're my mother, and we treated you like a problem to manage instead of someone to love." I finally looked at him. And for a moment the old ache returned, sharp, bright. Then it softened. Not erased. Acknowledged. "I'm not promising perfection," I said. Trevor nodded. "I'm not asking for it." I dried my hands slowly, deliberately. Outside, the lake lay frozen and quiet under the moonlight. Inside, the cottage felt warm, not because everything had been fixed, but because the truth was finally allowed to exist. Later that night, when the house went still, I stepped onto the deck alone, pulled my coat tighter and breathed in the cold. I thought about how close I'd come to disappearing. Not dying. Disappearing. I heard a creak behind me. Alan stood in the doorway, hesitant. "Margaret," he said softly. "Can I come out?" I held his gaze for a long beat, then nodded once. Alan stepped beside me, careful. We stood together, looking out at the ice. After a while, Alan spoke again, voice low. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not because of the duplex. Not because of the money. Because I made you feel like you had to earn your place in this family." I let the words settle. Then I said the one thing that was true, the one thing I'd built my whole year around. I'm not invisible anymore. And this time when I said it, I didn't mean the world. I meant the people closest to me. Meant home. My story didn't end with money. It ended with being seen. If my journey reminded you that your voice matters, that your boundaries matter, please subscribe to Revenge Bite. Let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Because you deserve to be witnessed too. And I promise, there are more stories like mine waiting to be told.